So you can see on the front, I've got quite a symmetrical sphere. But if I go to the side, I can change what's my active symmetry at any given time by going into transform and playing with symmetry. But looking at the side, I can see that this mesh is not quite as symmetrical as the other mesh, which might not be a problem at the start, but as you continue to sculpt and you start to go down to fine details, little errors in your symmetry will propagate and become really bad. So for the emoji sculpt, I'm just going to focus on the front axis. And you can tell if it's going forward by looking at this blue and red line. This is just telling you X, Y, Z, by the way. So I'm going to go back into my symmetry and make sure I only have X symmetry on, which is this blue line. And I'm going to go find myself some reference. Now, I went ahead and did this earlier, but you can find it just using a Google search. I then loaded it into a software that I like to use called PureRef. So there's this little window here with my reference open. That'll just sit there over the top of ZBrush, and I don't have to worry about going back and forth between references or trying to load something into the program itself. Cool. I'm just going to get started then. With a serious sculpt, I like to do a thing called landmarking, but for what we're doing, I think I want to give myself a little more wiggle room. So I'm going to go down to geometry. Again, lots of ways to do things. I can increase my poly size by dynameshing if I wanted, if I didn't care about UVs or how this is going to be rendered, if I just wanted more polys. Z-remesher, I can double it. I can increase the number of polygons I have while keeping a neat line structure. Or I can, if I just want to double what I have, which I think I'll do, is I can go down into geometry and click divide. And you can see it's jumped up to 11,000. All that's going to do is take all of these quads and divide them into 2. So watch my points, 11,300, hit divide, 45,378 now. So I'm just going to zoom in, I hit Alt, start moving my pen tool, take off Alt, and that allows me to zoom in. And you should be able to see, I'm also going to just hit plus now, to zoom in a little bit more. You can see we actually have little polygons here, which gives me a lot more material to play with as I'm sculpting. Now to do your actual sculpting, we're just going to start off very simply using BST, or your standard brush, and just go nuts. Start sculpting your character. I'm just going to begin by giving myself a little smile, and see what happened there. As you press down, you're going to add polygons to your mesh. But I don't want to add, I want to subtract. So I'm going to select Alt, and I'm going to start modeling out my smile. I've decided I actually want it to be a bit flatter. So I'm going to use a completely different tool now called Trim Dynamic. So B for brush, T for trim, D for dynamic. Now brush dynamic's pretty handy, especially if you're trying to polish things. So if you look at what I'm doing right now, my brush is simply taking my sphere and cleaning up this part of the mesh, making it flatter wherever my pen goes, but also quite straight. And if you hit Alt, you can bring it out according to your brush size. Very handy tool to have. Now spacebar allows me to bring up this little window where it has some very handy tools. I'm just going to drop down my draw size, drop down my intensity, I'm going to zoom into my mouth, and I'm just going to smooth out my mesh. And this is effectively all we do in ZBrush. We sit here and we sculpt until we're happy. Might even use the move tool, BMV, increase the size slightly, and adjust the mouth. And one last tool I'm going to show you, just really quickly, is Damien Standard, which is very handy for trying to give yourself some straight lines. That's B, D, S for Damien Standard. This is basically just giving you, like, I guess, you think of it as claw marks if you want. You can scratch and gouge big lines out. Or Alt to invert it and bring out sharp lines. And that is handy with something like this mouth here, because I'm going to drop the draw size, hit Alt to bring it out, and sharpen up these lines here. Another way we can move bodies like this is by using our masking tools. So I'm going to draw out this eye shape. Now the way you draw out an eye shape is you hit Control to bring up your mask. If you want to change your mask, BM. These are all the mask tools that you have at your disposal. BM, and for some reason K to use your mask pen. A little window will open up. This brush will be selected as the active masking brush. That's fine. Hit Control and then click to use it. So what that means is that whenever we hit Control, if you look up in your brush window, your masking pen will spawn. And by the way, if you hit Shift, your smoothing tool will spawn. So that's Control for masking, Shift for smoothing, and just nothing for your regular brush. Now, when you're drawing this out, if you're following me along, you should notice that you're getting a lot of smudginess along your mask, and you'll be seeing the same thing along your lips. This is to do with the number of active points that we actually have in our sculpt. It may seem like a lot, but this for a ZBrush project, this is actually quite a mediocre amount of points that we're playing with. And as a result, we're able to identify the polygons just by looking at how the shading's working. So if you want to lower this jag, you either need to use Z-Remesher to change how your curves run, which we can do using polygroups, or we can increase the density of our mesh. To get a really sharp edge, I'm actually going to try and do both. So I'm going to clear my mask by hitting Control Box. I'm going to divide up my mesh again. Do it again. So now we're reaching 1,000,000 polygons. So now with a higher density mesh, when I hit Control, my mask is that much cleaner. Even if I go Control Alt and sharpen it up, or Shift and blur it down, or Control and blur it down, you can see that the mask itself is a lot easier to work with. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this eye shape. Now because I'm planning to remesh this, my end goal here is I want to create a polygroup out of the eyes and the mouth, separate from this model, and use the different polygroups to remesh around the borders. So in addition to blocking out these eyes, I'm also going to block out the mouth. Now to double check your mask, remember that right now we're working in polyfill mode. So Shift F, and what you're looking for are white bits in your shading. Now the lighting unfortunately is having a bit of an effect on our mask, so we can change the material by coming to the material panel. I think I might want to change it to chalk. Is there a better one? I'll just change it to chalk. And I can see here that it doesn't look like there's any missed spots in my mask, which is good. That's what we want. So I want to go into my polygroups panel, and I want to tell this sculpt I want to group all the masked areas together. So I hit Group Masked, clear my mask. If I look at line fill, different colors will tell me what polygroup they belong to. So I've got reds and I've got greens. I think I'm going to change this color I'm going to change this to matte cap because that white is just intense. So now I have my polygroups. I'm going to go back up to Subtool, Z Remesher, Geometry Z Remesher, my apologies. I'm going to turn on Line Fill, and I'm going to tell it I want to keep my groups together. I'll make sure I've got the same number of polygons. Adaptive density is fine. Hit Z Remesher. Let that do its thing. And you can see now, in your sculpt, the mesh is following along with the eye shape. Z Remesher will just try and give you nice clean lines, irrespective of UV maps or anything like that. So this is one of the uses for polygroups, just making sure that Z Remesher knows, hey, I want to keep things the same. So now we have our polygroups and a reasonably clean mesh. I'm just going to use my Move tool to clean these up a little bit. This Move tool, by the way, is very handy for things like this. So now we should have some nice clean lines in terms of the polylines along our eyes and our mouth. Now to move these, we can isolate by polygroup by using our Move tool, Control, Shift, click, and now anything in that polygroup has been isolated. Move to your character side, make sure that you're in non-perspective mode, you're in orthogonal. We're going to unlock the gimbal. We're going to reset its orientation, relock the gimbal, and then move. I'll just zoom in to make it more obvious. And then we're going to move back to give us that nice edge we seem to have in the eye. And now we'll do the same for the mouth. Look at that. There we go. And there's an emoji sculpt. And now that we have our emoji the way we like it, I'll up this to 512. Just give it a bit of a test to make sure that's behaving nicely. Great. And now you can just smooth out your mesh a bit to make it presentable. So guys, that's ZBrush in a nutshell. There's a lot more tools we haven't gone over, and we haven't learnt all the brushes obviously, but you now know how to use brushes. You know about polygroups and some of the things that they can be used for. You know about densities, how do you use your dynameshing versus, say, a Z Remesher. At this point you could actually go forward and just start self-teaching if you really wanted, but yeah, I'll continue to make some videos for you.